It's time to look in the mirror, America. Do you like what you see?
I keep referring to Obama as the magic Negro.
Do you like what you see now?
Well, suck on this.
It's just a mirror, America.
Shared sacrifice by everybody.
What could it do to you except reflect your image?
I did nothing wrong at the Minneapolis airport.
The Majority Report.
Far more credible to me than PBS and Frontline.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, September 25th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Associate Professor of Economic History at the Industrial Labor Relations School at Cornell University, Louis Hyman, on Temp, how American work, American business, and the American dream became temporary. Also on the program today, Kavanaugh claims virginhood as a defense against sexual assault. Meanwhile, Rod Rosenstein not fired, but meeting with Trump on Thursday, coincidentally the same day Kavanaugh is testifying. Meanwhile, Trump at the UN, a laugh riot. Avenatti has a third accuser as Mark Judge is hiding somewhere at the beach.
With Spider-Man comics, right?
Is that right?
That's what I heard.
Dallas police fire the cop in the Botham Jean killing. And there's a split on how and when to renew the Violence Against Women Act, which sunsets this weekend. Coincidentally.
Very seasonal.
Yes, and lastly, Monsanto's Roundup kills honeybees. Whoops. All that and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, I imagine you will notice that there is a slight difference in the way that I did that headline today. We did not have, for the first time in, I guess there's been moments where we've had to do, something on the fly. But in the first time in, years, I have done the opening of the show without pressure drop there. Part of the reason, the only reason, is because we were getting copyright strikes on YouTube for it. Now, I have an ASCAP license, for audio, but not YouTube does not recognize that stuff. There's no way to sort of put that through on YouTube. And I should be clear, we're not in trouble. We just can't monetize the video. And it's not a huge amount of money, but every little bit counts. So I'm putting it out there. If you are a musician, I don't want to get like one that's like somebody does on their small, MIDI recorder.
Need some quality here.
Yeah. But I need a knockoff version of that, of Pressure Drop. Now, I'm not gonna. There's some folks out there who do ska, I understand, and occasionally do a Friday.
This might be your moment.
But this could be the moment. It'll lock you in. But and it doesn't. There doesn't even have to be vocals. And if you do like a cool version with just like bongos. I don't know why that sticks in my head, but
you want bongos? Be careful what you request now.
Buddy?
Would that be too much?
I'm down for whatever. It just needs that energy.
Yeah, it needs that energy. That's all. And so in the meantime, we're going to figure out some type of fix. It feels so lonely to do the headlines without music.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
It's weird. It's definitely weird. Believe me, you can imagine how weird it is for me.
Yeah.
Folks, speaking about being naked up there, Donald Trump was at the United Nations, and I think we can all relate to the anxieties that come with addressing a crowd And they do tell you, one of the things that they tell you, or maybe they never tell you this, but I saw it on the Brady Bunch. You're supposed to imagine the whole audience in their underwear. That way you don't get nervous because you're like, well, what's going to happen? They're going to laugh at me? I'll laugh right back at them because they're all in their underwear. Let's hope that the President of the United States had that in mind today as he addressed all of the world's leaders at the United Nations, and they started to laugh at him.
Today I stand before the United Nations General Assembly to share the extraordinary progress we've made. In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
Yep. They laughed at you.
We're all friends.
It's all great.
It's all
I can't
great.
wait to bomb all of you. I'm going to bomb you all.
I'm going to be so angry. This is going to be like...
I will say that his reaction, at least, was not as angry as that correspondence dinner where
Well, he was
Barack
sitting
Obama
That's the difference.
mocked him, and he decided, I know what I'll do. I'll ruin the country
Yeah.
because of that. So I think maybe the rest of the world is safe, but
when you're at the UN, you can't just picture people in their underwear because they don't wear underwear in other places.
I mean,
It's different things.
Just-
It's sumo outfits,
for a moment,
panther skin.
think about how often we have heard, in the context of American politics, the lines, we are the laughing stock of the world. The world is laughing at us.
It's
And we
literally happened.
finally made it so that it was literally the case.
They're not going to be laughing at us anymore because they're going to get it all out of their system.
All right, everybody got it out of your system? It's fun? Okay.
Now
Now back to the speech.
Ruining the world to own the libs.
There you go. Hey, if you like stories you hear on our show, we think you'll like the Sierra Club's new storytelling podcast, The Land I Trust. Season 2 of The Land I Trust is out now, bringing you storytellers from across the western U.S. who share their experience in harvesting, protecting, and living with the 4 natural elements: water, fire, wind, and air. The series has 14 tales of individuals across the western part of the country as they share their tales of climate change, clean energy, and everything in between. Each year, the Sierra Club visits a different region of the country for a new set of stories. Season 1, stories from the American South. They talk to musicians, families, farmers, climate refugees, helping to move the South from coal ash pollution to a brighter, cleaner future. You can listen to The Land I Trust at beyondcoal.org/stories or on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. Check out Season 2 of The Land I Trust today. So just to give you a little highlight, we'll play a little more sound, but there's the developments over the past 24 hours in the Kavanaugh story included his testifying in front of Fox News, which was, I have to say, I was shocked. A week ago, I was saying, Blasey Ford could go on television, and this is something that Kavanaugh can't do. He can't go on and address this stuff. And, well, he did. He did it on Fox. It was pretty fascinating. We will talk more about that. He included the idea that he was a virgin, so presumably he wouldn't have been caught up in what... Now, you got to follow me here. Avenatti has said that he has a client who will speak to allegations that Mark Judge was involved with people who would get women drunk, girls drunk in high school, and then have multiple guys have sex with them. Now, we've said in the past, Avenatti, there's a little bit of hyperbole there. I couldn't sit down and tell you what he's been right and wrong on at this point, and what he hasn't delivered and what he's indicated, some of which I think, mostly he's delivered what he's indicated to a large extent. But I will also say, and I'll talk about this later in the program too, that in the New Yorker, and I haven't seen anybody make this connection, in the New Yorker, there is a story buried deep in that piece where a former girlfriend of Mark Judge alludes to something just like that Mark Judge told her about when they were in college, about when he was in high school. So we will talk more about that. Kavanaugh claimed that he was a virgin, I think as a defense against that story, which they think is going to get larger. He also then went on to say that he never even knew Blasey Ford, which I think is going to be very problematic, because there are people who certainly must know that she knew him. I mean, she can't be making that up, right?
That seems incredibly far-fetched.
That seems far-fetched to me. We will discuss all of that, but those are the only steps forward in this story as of yet. Although there's also been Kavanaugh's roommate came out with a statement talking about Brett Kavanaugh as being a guy who abused alcohol significantly enough that it changed his personality significantly. We will discuss that. Also, there was another story that came from the Times that looked at the yearbook of Kavanaugh, and he and about a dozen other students at that school had basically had some type of code words in there implying that they had all had some type of relationship with a woman who was unaware that she was the target of this meme, essentially. We will talk about that. The other thing that, a brief update, and there's really not much to update here. At the time of this program yesterday, Rod Rosenstein headed to the White House to discuss with Donald Trump, I don't know what. Nobody seems to know what. That decision on Rosenstein's status was punted to Thursday. We don't know what that means. I saw a video which suggested that John Kelly wanted it to be seen that he was shaking Rosenstein's hand. I don't know what that means other than to project that things are civil, that John Kelly has a good relationship with Rosenstein. Don't know beyond that what that means. But that's going to happen on Thursday, presumably the same day where we're going to hear testimony from Blasey Ford and Kavanaugh, assuming they both show up. So that's where we are. The only thing I would say about the Rosenstein thing, and we will talk about who may or may not take over from him, is I don't know if it was a trial balloon yesterday. They wanted to see what would happen if they floated the idea that they were going to fire this guy. But certainly in retrospect, they can get a notion. And I didn't see anybody lighting their hair on fire about this. I'm talking about Republican senators. And so that's gives you a little sense of where this might be headed. I should also say, somebody corrected me yesterday. I referred to Rosenstein as the acting attorney general. He is not the acting attorney general. He is acting as the attorney general in the context of the Mueller investigation because the attorney general has recused himself. He is, in fact, the deputy attorney general. So that's that. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Louis Hyman, Associate Professor of Economic History at the Industrial Labor Relations School of Cornell, on Temp, how American work, American business, and the American dream became temporary. On the phone, it's a pleasure to welcome to the program the Associate Professor of Economic History at the Industrial Labor Relations School of Cornell University and author of Temp, How American Work, American Business, and the American Dream Became Temporary. Louis Hyman, thanks so much for joining us.
A real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start. And I will concede that I had a little bit of difficulty figuring out what should be the first question. But let's start as broadly as we can, insofar as if you could track for us the changes in the way that people perceived the purpose of the economy from, let's say the 30s through to today.
Sure. So that's a really key question. It's something that the book is all about. So basically the book is divided into two parts. There's the first part that's from roughly the 1930s to 1970. That is the story of how different people, corporate leaders, policymakers, labor leaders, tried to create an economy that was stable. They were coming out of depression and war, and of course 100 years of industrial unrest, and they wanted to figure out how to make industrial capitalism work for everybody. And so the first half of the book is that story. The story, or the first few chapters, is the story of that. And then the second half is, well, what happened? Why does it not work that way anymore? And this is not what our society is organized around. It's around sort of maximizing profit for stake shareholders rather than all the different stakeholders in our economy. And so the story of Temp is the story of how we go from an economy that is based on security and stability to one that's based on insecurity and instability, and the choices that made that happen, so that it pushes back on the narrative we're often told, which is it's just about technology, and it's absolutely not just about technology. It's about the choices we make about how to organize that technology. Okay, so let's start in that first era when the notion was that the economy should be for the benefit of everybody. But before we go any further, there's a caveat, isn't there? We got to put an asterisk around the word everybody, I guess. Everybody, yeah. So when you have to summarize in 30 seconds, you say everybody. But the reality was that security was only defended for white men, and that everybody who was not a white man had a different relationship to that, right? So white women had access to this security through their husbands, if they were married, or not, if they didn't. And then, of course, people of color, people who weren't American citizens, had a very different relationship to that. And that exclusion, that I argue, that is sort of the people who are left out, enables a different kind of economy to be rehearsed in the midst of this prosperity. So a lot of the story is about the 50s and 60s, when you can see in the lives of women temps and Mexican laborers a world that is going to emerge in the 70s and 80s, but not just for those people on the margins, but for everyone, including white men. And so part of the story is about what happens when you leave some people out of that security and when they don't count as much as white men. And so that's part of the story there as well. And I have to say, I think that's a super important lesson for folks that can be applied in a lot of different areas, because we're basically talking about folks who were on the margins of political power being the canaries in the coal mine, essentially. Exactly. And because they were left out, employers were able to use them in ways that undermine security of those white men. So, in the end, the white men, may have had security for a while, whether they were unionists or office workers or executives, but they, in the end, because certain people were not included, then that it was easier for employers to begin to employ undocumented workers in Silicon Valley or lots of temps to replace people. And eventually we get to deindustrialization and downsizing for first the blue-collar workers and the white-collar workers.
All right. So, I mean, is it enough to for our purposes to say that in that first period that we're talking about, in the post-World War period, roughly from 35 to 70, we are we're looking at, or I guess say 45 to 70, we're looking at stability for white men in the workforce, the ability to make enough to maintain a middle class living. Let's talk about. I mean, and if that's not enough, at least to pivot to those who are on the outside, what their job situation was. Tell me. But if it is. Let's go through those. I mean, you spoke about women to a certain extent that they have this security as a wife, but talk about the implications of being a person of color, and then we'll talk about immigrants.
Sure. I think when we are nostalgic, both on the left and the right, for this post-war period, it's easy to write out parts of that experience as if they can just be sidelined. So this is an era of Jim Crow. This is a moment when African Americans don't have political rights in a lot of ways, and they, in very important ways, but in a very everyday kind of way, don't have consumer or labor rights. And it's a period that we're nostalgic for in this idea that manufacturing jobs were good and office work was good, but it is also a period of, we made that work for us. And, what happens after 1970 is we begin to not make that work. And, I think that as women and African Americans were able to demand better access to, political and economic rights in the 60s and 70s and become to the fore, well, they carry along with them certain kinds of work experiences. And, they're, instead of including them fully into the security of the post-war that white men enjoyed, what we did instead was, not we, but, business owners began to rely on them as cheaper, flexible, more disposable labor. And this is central to the story of the economy in the 70s and 80s, when we begin to move away from automaking as and aerospace as the big industries towards electronics as the big industry that's driving the economy.
All right, so talk about. I mean, you focus on two companies. I mean, obviously more than that, but two that I think provide that sort of the manpower and the ideology of that transition. Talk about why you focus on Manpower and McKinsey Consulting.
Sure. So the through line of the book is thinking about these two companies. So the book really looks at how the corporation is remade from top to bottom, how executives get displaced by consultants, how office workers get displaced by temps, how unionized workers get displaced by migrant workers. And an important part of that story is the story of McKinsey & Company, which is the world's most important strategy management consulting firm. It begins in the 1930s as a way to help these new corporations of the 20s and 30s and 40s begin to really modernize. And it becomes a place for ideas about how corporations should organize. And Manpower emerges into importance in the same period. Right after World War II in 1947, the founder of Manpower, Elmer Winter, he's a lawyer in Milwaukee, and he begins the very first big temp agency. And, I think that by telling the story through these companies, you see how it isn't a bunch of evil conspiracies. It's about business decisions. It's about business opportunities. But it's also about choices that are being made about different ways to run our businesses. There's always that choice between making life worse for workers and making profits that way, but also opportunities for making things better. And you can see the confusion in the business world over how to run businesses through the stories of these two companies and their centrality in reorganizing the American corporation. So McKinsey and similar kinds of companies like Boston Consulting Group or Price Waterhouse. These are companies that corporations listen to and look to guide them through reorganization after reorganization. And an important pivot in the story is around 1970, when these management consultants, selling big contracts to the country, to the world's largest corporations, begins to encourage them to think about their workforces in a different way, as less about an asset and more as a liability, to think of them more as a variable cost rather than family, and to think of them more as something that can be eliminated in the name of prosperity and efficiency. And it's a complicated story, but fundamentally that's it. Whose ideas matter most in remaking our economy? And I think the answer is the consultants that get paid, an enormous amount of money to remake those companies.
Okay, so what was the dynamic when what changed? So the change, it seems that when we talk about the change in the economy, right, the perspective of the economy, is that a cultural thing? And if it is, I mean, I'm just curious between the interplay between the broader culture that perceives the economy as a certain thing that changes, right, and the way that McKinsey, for example, changed that made that change that you just talked about. Like, what were the motivating factors? Was it just one day in 1969 somebody said, I want more? I mean, what was it that drove that change?
An important part of this account is something that I think we've forgotten. So most people that remember the 60s today were kids, right? They were having a good time. And there was something that was going on in the 60s that we don't talk about a lot, which is the rise of a new corporate form called the conglomerate. And conglomerates are weird. So it had been the case for most of the history of industrial capitalism that you wanted to be bigger and bigger and bigger, but always within your particular field. So think about U.S. Steel. You want to be big, you want to own steel. Well, conglomerates, these companies were making so much money in the 1960s. Capitalism was working so well, but there were very strong antitrust movements at that point. There were new kinds of financial instruments like the leveraged buyout that allowed companies to take over other companies in unrelated fields. And this happened everywhere in the 1960s. So about 90% of the Fortune 500 became a conglomerate. And what happened around and everybody thought, all the business journalists, all the business leaders, all the business schools thought this was made possible by expert managers, that this new kind of manager was able to manage anything. Well, it turned out around 1968, 69, 70, people began to doubt this very intensely because a few of these companies were revealed to have actually produced no additional profit. They had grown their revenues, but they hadn't grown their profits. And suddenly everything began to fall apart in the stock market, but more importantly, it opened up a crisis of how to think about the corporation. And into this crisis stepped a bunch of intellectuals that were business gurus, that were management consultants, that offered an alternative that didn't look like the post-war corporation, but didn't look like the conglomerate either. And basically they threw out the baby with the bathwater, that this structure that had actually served America very well for many decades was tossed out in the name of progress. And it's true, they were solving for new kinds of shareholder value. It's what historians call the shareholder value revolution, where shareholders really come to the fore. But it's not just that. It's this new way of thinking about the corporation that is so important in this moment. So it's a complicated story, but fundamentally it's about ideas, and like you said, and culture, and not fundamentally about economics.
All right, so
or technology.
We're talking about so at this point we're talking about the assets are there insofar as I'm talking about sort of the ideological assets, right? Like we have a class of people who are already functioning as temps, who already do not have job security, whether it's immigrants, people of color, and women who have been left out of that equation, that post-World War equation, by things like Social Security not functioning for specific jobs that are more or less exclusive to people of color and to women.
Domestic and agricultural work. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and what other instruments led to there being this sort of like template for what these financializers who want to get shareholder value? What other dynamics were there? I mean, obviously, if you're undocumented immigrant, you have no rights, right? What else contributed to their temporary status?
Well, for undocumented migrants, in the early 70s, we see the passage of new kinds of environmental laws like OSHA. OSHA didn't exist until the early 1970s. And, a lot of the industry that was growing at the time, electronics, was dirty industry. And so it wasn't just about labor rights, although it was about labor rights. It was about environmental rights. And so Silicon Valley can grow by giving the dirty, dangerous work to people who aren't part of the polity, who aren't citizens. For temp workers, women in particular, the growth came because Elmer Winter realized by the end of the 1950s that there were only so many secretaries that were going to get sick or go on vacation. And so he began to push for a program of replacing whole workforces with temporary workers that could be brought in as needed. And this didn't work very well. It did until you had the transition to the computer. And in the computer, corporations have this example of the need for huge workforces to do the data entry and turn all that paper into bits. And they start to see this example, and then the crisis happens in 69 and 70. And suddenly Elmer Winter and Manpower and all the rest of these temp agencies are able to convince corporations to really begin to look to them as an alternative workforce. So in the 1970s, you start to see corporations using huge swaths of temp workers as a buffer against the market, and so that their quote-unquote real employees don't get fired in a downturn. And at the top of this hierarchy are the consultants that are also temps, right? They come in and out of work, they come in and out of workplaces, and they're organized in a very temporary way. They may only work for a few years at McKinsey or BCG. It's a very up or out, very brutal atmosphere, but they also think it's good, and they think this is the right way to organize work. And so consultants use their own model of work to reorganize the corporation. And so all these things kind of come together in the 1970s in this sort of the global crises of the oil shocks. And, in the moment of crisis, there's opportunity to sell new ideas, to sell new policies. And that's exactly what we see here.
And okay, and so just to disaggregate some of that, the computer allows temp workers to come in, do their work, and it almost creates this sort of short-term institutional memory or long-term institutional memory, right? That wasn't there before, right? Gladys was here yesterday, and Mary is here today, and the computer knows where Gladys left off, and Mary can just continue with that data entry.
Yeah, so the computer is an important part of this, but the sort of experience for the corporations, and this is an important thing to realize, is that experience matters so much. So no matter how much the data could show a corporate executive, and Elmer Winter had all the data in the world to show that temps were cheaper, that temps were efficient, that temps were a great replacement for your workforce, they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it because they didn't want to take the risk. They valued their employees. Well, they have this experience of the first data migration, the first time all those spinning magnetic tapes needed to be filled with information of workers coming in, working through the night, doing data entry, and they say, oh, wow. And they do this because they don't want to overtax their existing staff, but they say, oh, wow, look, we can actually replace a whole function in our corporation effectively and efficiently with temporary workers, and it was a good idea. And then it becomes an example for other kinds of activities once the crisis comes in the 70s, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's out there, and it's just waiting for its opportunity. And these, so we have the failure of the conglomerates to bring more profits to shareholders, and then consultants come in and basically, I mean, this is where we move to the financialization of our economy in some respects.
Yes, and in my first two books were about the history of personal debt, which deal a lot with the history of this financialization, deal a lot with the history of how finance became so important, how the 1% in the post-war paid the 99% wages, but after 1970, the 1% just lent them money. And this inequality of work is part of what drives this inequality, the demand for all that debt, the demand for all that consumer debt, the increasing volatility of work, the uncertainty, insecurity of work. And this is the long arc of our society today in terms of finance and work, and these two things are very intertwined.
It's interesting to me because the consultants come in and you draw this parallel between them saying, like, we function as temporary workers, and so this model works. And on some level, it seems like CEOs and board of directors have a similar perspective. I mean, I think this is, our audience will recognize this as one of my hobby horses, but the idea of changes in the way that CEOs are compensated through stock options, and then the almost the simultaneous tax reform, or I should say vice versa, the tax reform, and then subsequently followed by the change in the way that CEOs are compensated, and then their ability to buy back their own stocks. Their thinking, their projections, became less about the long-term health of the corporation and more about the short-term ability to raise the value of stocks for shareholders, because they had a lot of investment in that company, and they can walk away almost with a big payoff from a cottage industry. I mean, isn't that, part of this dynamic? Like, these consultants coming in, they're making a lot more than the other temp workers. And
absolutely, yeah.
And the CEOs, they may see it as a temporary position, but they're also making a lot more, in fact, a lot more than they were, relatively speaking, even then. I mean, that seems to be, was it just unfettered greed? I mean, why, I understand why at that moment, because there was a failure to deliver these increased profits to shareholders. Was that the first time that profits had leveled out? And so that greed was always there, it just wasn't being satiated, or what changed?
Well, I like the word unfettered that you just used, because I do think people are essentially greedy, and we shouldn't be surprised when they act in their own self-interest. But when we talk about the post-war and how we're nostalgic for it, we often leave out the fact that the top marginal tax rate was 93%, right? So the equivalent today of when that kicked in was about $2 million. So if you made more than $2 million, every dollar after that was taxed 93 cents out of the dollar. And that began to go away. We began to reduce those top tax rates. And of course, in the Reagan era, we reduced the capital gains rate, which incentivizes the sort of shift from being paid in wages to being paid in stock and the buybacks and all that other stuff. And so I think the rules change, right? So that's part of it, the unfetteredness. And that's an important story to tell as part of this. But it's also important to tell the story of how the corporation itself was shifted away from the long term, like you said, to the short term, not just for the CEOs, but for research, for office workers, for managers who began to be evaluated on that next quarter or that last quarter, and instead of long-term investment. And they began to prioritize, in the aftermath of this conglomerate failure, rising profits rather than minimizing risk and really technological development. And so there's a lot of ways in which these things all fit together that aren't about finance and about outsized pay for CEOs, which now, I think in the 60s it was something like 40 times, the average was about 40 times the median worker. Now it's about 400 times the median worker. And, part of that is the way we structure our laws, the fetters. And part of that is also just about, how we think about the purpose of a corporation as a thing that we should extract value from or something that we should invest in for stakeholders like workers and consumers in the long run.
And let me, I don't want to nitpick, but when we say we, isn't part of the problem, I think, in terms of why there's such widespread dissatisfaction with the way our economy is working now? And by widespread, I mean, a significant majority of, I think, the population feels frustrated by it. Yeah. Some people feel like it's going gangbusters. Is that we as a society have not really considered what the corporations are doing. It's really just the people inside them and who consult with them who have sort of taken over that. It seems to me that to use that fettering term, that society was much more fettering up until a certain point. And then everything was left to these businesscrats.
Well, the fetters were made in the 1930s and 40s, right? So we had 100 years where, and just nowadays we're nostalgic for these factory jobs. You hear people talking about how great it is to work in a factory or to work in a coal mine. Well, that was where people went to die. You would lose your arms, you would get black lung, you wouldn't get paid well. We made those jobs pay reasonable for working people. And, today we don't talk about corporations and corporate regulations. We talk about technology. So if you talk to people, they say, well, what's wrong with our society? Well, it's this Uber, it's this app, it's this robot, it's this algorithm. Well, the alternative to Uber is not a good factory job or a stable office job. The alternative to Uber is a part-time job selling coffee or a part-time job working at Walmart. And it's these other corporations that most of us work for that really matter. And then most of us are scrambling to make do with the gig economy to balance that out. And that's the truth of the matter, that Uber is the waste product of the service economy. It wouldn't be possible without the rest of everything going so badly.
Is it also, and I was going to raise that because you do refer to it as the waste product of the service economy. Is it also a short circuit to any type of reform? I know it's not designed that way. It's coming in and it's basically cleaning up the dregs on some level and taking advantage of the fact that its drivers are already being taken advantage of by somebody else. But is it also functioning to sort of short circuit maybe any type of larger reforms in that first sector that of which Uber is a waste product of?
Yeah, I think that we need to, and when I say we, I mean American citizens. American voters, the American people, and I say we very intentionally because I think it's only by building a majority consensus that we want capitalism to work for us, not for the few. And, capitalism has always been unequal, that it is an engine of inequality, but it's also an engine of growth. And it can be harnessed to create prosperity for all of us. And that's what we have to get back to. Policies on both the left and the right that are dealing with the world as it is and not in this nostalgic way for a world of yesteryear, and engaging with the new digital economy as it is. And that's going to take not just laws, but workers coming together, trying to create a new kind of voice with each other. And the unions that we have are not doing that. They're just not doing that. And so just in other periods in our history, we need to have new kinds of ways to rebalance power between workers and employers. And, in the end, it can work better for employers as well. The Fortune 100 never failed to make a profit for the entire post-war period. And, we had extraordinary, much faster GDP growth, 9% a year in some periods in the post-war. And, this was amazing. And I think we can do it again. We just have to focus more on how to invest capital that is currently being wasted on speculation and housing markets and whatever into new industries that employ a lot of people, that create jobs. And right now we're not doing that. So you hear a lot in the media about GDP and, unemployment. And certainly the GDP is growing, but for who, right? For whom? So, and unemployment, well, those numbers are low, but so what is left out of that are the number of people between 6 and 8% of the workforce that have dropped out, unable to find work since the last recession. And that's just going to come back to hit us even more so when the next downturn comes.
And you cite in the book, I think 94% of net new jobs over the past something like 15 years or some odd are temp jobs.
That's right. So temp, broadly construed, alternative work that doesn't look like you expected when you were a kid, 9 to 5 work. 94% of the net new jobs, so jobs created over jobs destroyed, are in this space. And so even though the majority of us who have jobs are still in this older workforce model, all the growth is in this new space. And when the next recession comes, and it will happen again, unless there's the end of the business cycle, we will see that the growth and recovery comes in this space. And so now, just like people who were consultants in the 60s and, Elmer Winter in the 60s, we need to prepare now with new ways of thinking about how we want our economy to be after that next crisis.
So I just want to tie back into that, because where that power comes from. I mean, how much of the demise of unions and really, I guess, led to the ability of that shift ultimately to a shareholder value economy? And all right, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. So it's easy to think that it was a bunch of laws that were passed in the New Deal that made for a strong labor movement. This is a story we often hear. But in the book, the beginning of the book, I open with the Flint sit-down strike of 1936, where a group of auto workers faced down the largest corporation in the world, General Motors, and they win. They sit down, they occupy it, and they don't win because of lawyers. They don't win because of kumbaya. They win because of strategy. They pick a place where if they shut down the body plant for GM has to deal with them. And, this becomes the pattern for all of industrial work in the post-war, the strength of these new industrial unions that didn't exist. The idea you could organize unskilled and semi-skilled workers was an anathema to the American Federation of Labor. And the AFL and the CIO, the CIO was these industrial unions, they don't actually come back together until 1955. So this is something we forget, and we have to remember that the strongest post-war labor unions came out of breaking away from traditional labor. They occupied a space that was at the time illegal. And I think this is what labor can learn from Uber. Uber is totally illegal. Uber went into every market in America and just violated all the laws. And then somehow they forced them to accommodate it. Well, this is what labor did in the 30s and 40s, and this is what we need to do again. And so when we think about how we've moved from industry to our economy today, the story is about supply chains. It's about warehouses. It's about distribution. And if we look at places where we need to have victories, places like Amazon, well, it's those warehouses that need to be organized, but they need to be organized in relationship to other kinds of distribution, the ports, the truckers, everything. And it's only through that kind of radical activity that we're going to redress the scales. It's not just enough to pass some laws. And part of the failure of unions has been the focus on keeping old jobs rather than understanding new ways that work and business is being organized, and maybe putting themselves at risk, just like the founders of the CIO did in the 1930s.
Louis Hyman, author of Temp, How American Work, American Business, and the American Dream Became Temporary. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
A real pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
All right, folks. Interesting stuff. Big book. Super big.
Yeah.
Those some big ones.
It's interesting to hear somebody whose analysis hews so closely to my own, except when you get to the conclusion part.
He's pretty optimistic.
I would say so.
But I think he does recognize that it's going to involve some form of heretofore unseen specific moves by labor that will create this power.
Yeah.
I mean,
I have a lot more thoughts on this, but I'll save them.
But we shall see. You should read the book. And
yeah. I mean, he's optimistic in a very different way than I am, I'll just say.
Well, you guys could share your optimism, and I am not so optimistic.
Yeah.
He's optimistic about the potential of capitalism to stabilize and create a decent life for everyone, and I'm optimistic about the potential for creating something new. I'm
not convinced that he would. I'm not convinced. Maybe some form of capitalism, because I think that he feels that we're going to have to reorient into something different. But I don't know. Maybe that's the sequel interview. Should have him on Antifada and just pick it up from right there.
Maybe I will. Maybe we'll talk about some post-capitalist formations.
Folks, speaking of
post-capitalist formations,
I was going to say post-capitalist formations, but I guess we're still in the late capitalist formations. This program relies on your support.
mom's formation.
On your support to continue. Oh, wait, we're going to do this. You can go to Join the Majority Report. We still have. We have to play this audio for our freebies, just because this is so stunning. But I will remind you, this podcast relies on your support. You can become a member today at jointhemajorityreport.com for just a couple of dimes a day. You can support the free programming, and as a way of saying thank you, we give you extra content every day. We're also going to, for members, maybe we'll do this Thursday, provide an interview I did with Juan Cole for Ring of Fire on Yemen, which was pretty interesting to just sort of get a notion of the mess that place is, that we in our involvement in it. But before we go there, one of the political dynamic around the Kavanaugh thing is pretty fascinating, because I think it has changed, or at least the perceptions of how this is going to shake out politically has changed almost day to day from within the leadership of both parties. I think the conventional wisdom in Washington is that if Kavanaugh is confirmed, it is going to be most damaging politically in the most crass of political terms. From an electoral perspective, it's going to be most damaging to the Republicans. And of course, the price that we pay there is that we have potentially another 20 years, 30 years of an onslaught upon established rights for individuals, specifically women in terms of their sovereignty, established rights for LGBTQ folks, not to mention Brett Kavanaugh's assault on our regulatory scheme, which, barely came up in the context of his hearing because it's what Republicans are going to do. They're going to appoint far-right conservative judges who are going to be activists in their assault on the regulatory functions of our state. Maybe we'll get more into that on Thursday. But one of the other aspects of the political fallout of the Kavanaugh hearings is that Republican candidates have to respond to this. And many of them, and certainly not the majority, but a significant number of them don't have the ability to do so because they are so ignorant as to the idea that women are not chattel, that they can't express themselves in a way that doesn't come off as bat crap crazy. We are in Todd Aiken, legitimate rape territory. And along those lines, I give you Representative Kevin Cramer, the U.S. Senate candidate for North Dakota. I mean, this is amazing footage that we're about to play. And this is who Heidi Heitkamp is running against. At the end of it, the most amazing thing about this is that it's still a race after this guy says this. It gives you a sense of just how impenetrable Republican voters are in a state, with all due respect, Matt, like North Dakota. Here is Representative Kevin Cramer. He is on a local channel, one which the host of this channel has already blocked, Matt.
It's very friendly to the Republicans.
So he is on home safe territory.
Block that little luck bastard.
He is being cradled in his mama's arms here. And watch what happens.
I want to play for you a little bit about what was on Meet the Press on Sunday of your radio interview and then give you a chance to respond.
I didn't even know it made Meet the Press.
Here's some of what you said, according to Chuck Todd.
Yeah.
These are teenagers who evidently were drunk, according to her own statement. That they were drunk. Nothing evidently happened in it all, even by her own accusation. Again, it was supposedly an attempt or something that never went anywhere.
So at that point, had you seen her actual statement?
Yeah.
Because it never says she was drunk in it.
Well, she admits she's a 15-year-old that had been drinking at a party that, I mean, how many 15-year-olds handle a lot of alcohol, 36 years ago, when it wasn't that common, by the way, Chris. 36 years ago, it wasn't that common for 15-year-olds to be at booze parties.
Pause it for 1 second. 36 years ago, I was 15 years old.
Was it common to be at booze parties?
I was 15 years old. And I will tell you.
What was it like back then?
Was
Tell
it
us.
common to be at booze parties?
When you would take the horse and buggy to the town square and everybody would have hard apple cider, I got news for you. And this guy knows it. Yeah, girls drank.
Dad said I could borrow the carriage tonight.
Yeah. Girls drank. Boys drank. Everybody drank. Probably a lot more than they drink today, to be honest with you. I think that's probably, there's data to that effect. But continue.
Booze parties. The other thing is, remember, they didn't play the first part of that. The part about the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas.
Correct.
There's no context to there. That's what they do on NBC, by the way, and MSNBC and CNN and all the rest. So, again, this is their way of making sure they're trying to level the playing field.
But to be fair,
Sure.
you said in that quote there, nothing evidently happened in it at all, even by her own accusation. But in her own statement, she says, Kavanaugh was on top of me. He was laughing. He pushed me into the room. She tried to she doesn't say it here, but Kavanaugh's hand was over her mouth.
Right.
He was trying to undress her. I think most women would say something definitely happened.
Right. That I get. My point was that there was no type of intercourse or anything like that. That was my point, that nothing happened in terms of a sexual event beyond, obviously, the attack. Now, if it's true, here's the other thing, Chris.
Pause it. I love how he says, we got to go back. I love how he says, beyond, of course, the attack. And he just drops, like, the attack. The attempted rape.
Nothing sexual beyond the sex attack.
Right. There was no actual penetration because someone stopped the attempted rape.
Exactly.
So that's what I mean by nothing happened.
Right.
The hand over the mouth, yes.
It didn't go anywhere though after
Right.
the hand over the mouth.
After the hand over the mouth, and he tried to take this.
Doesn't count.
But even he realizes, like, how do I get out of this? And he chooses by saying the attack, the word attack, by just sort of swallowing, like, the attack. And then, like, I just
Nothing
go back.
happened in terms of a sexual event beyond, obviously, the attack. Now, if it's true, here's the other thing, Chris. We don't know that any of that happened. That's my point. We're trusting one person who doesn't recollect a lot of the facts, but some of them, and we're basing this on the presumption that something happened. We don't know that even what she describes happened.
But then, to be fair, why say that when you could have said, look, Judge Kavanaugh's unequivocally denied he was even there, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
Chris, so so let's talk this through a little bit. I do 200 radio shows a year. Heidi Heitkamp talks to her brother occasionally. Do I love to think out loud? Do I love to have direct access to the people of North Dakota? Yes, I do.
Yes, I do. I mean, what's amazing to me, honestly, is that this guy is not announcing, like, I'm going to drop out of the race today because obviously there's no way I can possibly win. Like, the idea that this is still a close race in that state leads me to believe that there is virtually nothing that could happen that would inhibit a Republican from having a viable chance in that state.
Yeah, right.
Regarding his claim that he appears on radio 200 times a year and Heidi only appears with her brother, I think it's true that neither of them really does town halls, but Kramer's 200 appearances are with this guy Rob Port, who was made a laughingstock in the Washington Post in the first couple of years of Obama because he took a tour and took a picture of, I think, like, Marxism in like the 19th century or some sort of academic textbook, and said the Obamas put it there, but actually it was like Jackie Kennedy or something.
Communism.
What is absolutely stunning, though, is that the guy is saying, I said these things because I do so many radio shows and so many like that I like to think out loud. Yet, we have just seen him with the perfect opportunity to reinterpret what he said on that radio show and completely say all this stuff again.
Well, I do hundreds of TV appearances.
It's not what he said.
It's another appearance.
I mean, that is stunning. And
is it though?
Well, sort of. I mean, you sort of think that, like, you'd have the ability. I mean, the guy's running for the Senate, and it's close.
We saw that focus group yesterday.
Yeah, but those focus group were other Republican, operatives.
But also, like, I feel like you might be able to get the same response from regular Republican women as well. Like, they didn't care about grab them by the pussy. Like, why do we think they're going to care about this?
I don't know.
On the margins, I think some I think some will care. I just don't know if it's going to be enough to keep Heidi in office.
It's stunning. It's stunning.
Think about all the good things we're doing
because
globally.
This guy, you don't even have to believe Kavanaugh is guilty of anything to look at this guy and say there's something wrong with this guy. Right? Like, he's saying that he is completely discounting the idea of an attempted rape. And when he gets called on that, he's like, well, we're not even sure if it happened. But he first says, he dismisses the concept of it.
Yeah, they really need to go with one thing or the other here. You shouldn't be doing that in the same breath.
I wonder about that though. If there's some like short-term tactical, just by having the issue so muddied, them playing defense 2 areas, it might not be working for them.
I think that's right.
3 areas with the doppelganger theory.
Not to mention, there was another guy there who just got candied apples from the party, so we're hearing, that looked just like him. It was another guy.
We'll go
being
through.
that as it may, nothing happened, and I'm on TV literally every second of my life, unlike Heidi.
We will go through. That was a weird thing. Oh, Heidi
She just talks to her brother. Anyways. There was a third member of the room.
All right, we got to take a break. Head to the fun half. Don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Michael, today is Tuesday,
indeed,
which means that you saunter in whatever you feel like it in the morning as a way of prepping for the Michael Brooks show this evening.
Tonight, amongst many other things, but I'll just focus for now on the guests. Alberto Almeida, who is a leading pollster in Brazil, is going to kind of crunch the numbers on that election and talk about whether or not fascism can be stopped at that country. It's looking increasingly likely, and it looks kind of mind-blowing that basically, like, with no access to the press, Lula, and in prison, Lula basically seems like he's orchestrating a win for the Workers' Party. They're surging in the polls. And then Matt Taibbi is going to talk about a new serial he's doing, a book that he's releasing in serial form on sort of an update of manufacturing consent, or manufacturing, the Noam Chomsky manufacturing dissent.
Consent, you got it.
Yeah, consent, yeah. The Edward Herman book in the 1980s, and we're also going to look at the financial crisis 10 years on.
And Jamie, the Antifada.
Yeah, so we've got an episode coming out this week with our friend Tanzim Ajmiri about a pamphlet she co-authored called How to Overthrow the Illuminati. It's geared towards Black and Hispanic teens who believe in the Illuminati theory as sort of a real attempt to try to figure out why the world is so unequal and unfair. And of course, the pamphlet comes to the conclusion that the real problem is capitalism. So I really like
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
So the book is an Illuminati plant.
Right. It sounds like an Illuminati book.
I mean, take everything I say with a grain of salt, because in addition to being Jewish, my grandpa played a role in putting fluoride in the water. Fun fact. So
obviously
I probably shouldn't tell people that.
Totally untrustworthy.
Wow. But we have some fun with conspiracy theories. It's all good.
All right. It's interesting to watch Jamie ride her bike and watch the chemtrails come off of the back of it. I will say it's fascinating. It is, the African American community in particular is, I think, conspiracy theories apparently have some purchase in that community, largely because of some of the horrible things that have happened to
all the conspiracies.
Because all the conspiracies turn out to be true.
The real conspiracies.
Like, you know this thing where they're giving syphilis to people? Like, I mean...
right, it's like, yeah. I wonder where AIDS conspiracies came from.
Right, and
the thing where they killed Fred Hampton.
Matt recently shared a pamphlet with me that has brought me in the opposite direction. I used to think it was capitalism, and now I understand who runs the world.
The Jews. Matt.
The Jews.
Literary hangover for patrons. I recorded another few chapters last night of Hope Leslie, the audiobook I'm doing and giving away to the public domain. But first, you have to be a patron. I'm really enjoying reading these.
Is that working?
It's working, actually. People are signing up like crazy.
Wow.
Because they want to hear me narrate audiobooks, apparently. And I'm really enjoying it. So even if it doesn't work, I'm still going to continue to read books.
Well, don't do that,
I need pleasure. Get the fuck out of here, loser.
I mean, people should continue signing up because you get a free, sort of free audiobooks out of it.
Yeah,
exclusive to my Patreon. No one else. You can't get these audiobooks anywhere else, folks.
Good salesman. Make
all right,
that
folks,
money.
646-257-3920 is the number. Our plan right now is on Thursday. Mike will be here tomorrow. On Thursday, we're probably going to start early. And we may go a little long. We're going to cover the hearings. And if they happen. If they don't, we got a backup plan. So... stay tuned. I think they're going to happen. I don't know. 646-257-3920 See you in the fun half. It's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. The fun half, wherein we take your phone calls, we take your IMs, and we have gosh darn fun. Let's go to the phones. You're calling from a 509 area code. Who am I speaking with, and from where are you calling?
Hey, Sam, this is Ronald Reagan. I'm calling from Portland, Oregon.
Oh, Ronald Reagan from Portland, Oregon. Yes, Ronald Reagan. What is on your mind?
Have you ever seen the movie Revenge of the Nerds?
I have, yes.
Yeah, so I watched this movie a few years ago for the first time, and for the young people out there, this is a movie that spawned a series. I think there's 3 or 4 films. So it's a somewhat popular franchise, and in the movie, it's sort of like I guess it's self-evident from the title, but the nerds are the good guys, and the kind of jockey football guys are the bad guys. Anyhow, so there's a scene where one of the nerds rapes a girl. He's wearing a Darth Vader mask, I believe, and he, the cheerleader thinks that he's her boyfriend, and so he has sex with her. And this is portrayed as not a rape, obviously, and also not like even a gray area, but as a great conquest for the nerd, like maybe the high point, right, for this particular character who we're supposed to be cheering for. And so I've been thinking about this movie in light of, the Kavanaugh stuff and everything that's going on, and it seems like really sadly a missed opportunity as sort of a culture and a society to look back at who we are and who we've been, and to sort of take inventory and to realize that we've got a long ways to go because these incidents in the Kavanaugh thing come about more or less at the same time that movies from 1984. And it's really troubling that not only are we hearing sort of like the vehement denials, but also this idea that none of that stuff matters. If it was a long time ago, or I think even Kavanaugh said, well, everyone does stuff that you cringe at, but he hasn't copped to anything
right
that he would cringe at. Or, he's denying having ever done something that he would cringe at. So I don't even know why he would say that. But I think two things can be true at the same time. The first thing is that we, on the issue of sex and gender equality, we've been a really disgusting society for a long time, and we have a lot of work to do. And another thing can be true, which is that not everyone in 1984 raped. There were, despite a really nasty culture that existed, there were plenty of good dudes who, weren't raping. But I thought maybe early on he would come out and say something like, I don't know why he thought this, but
no, but you know what? If he had done that, I honestly believe that. I would have had issues with this guy that were far broader. But if he had come out at one point, even upon the first moment there was a hint of this, and said, "Look, I did things as a teenager that, particularly when I drank, that were repulsive. These are things that I think about, and I'm giving him the benefit of doubt of actually being sincere at that moment.
Right.
These are things that I think about and have impacted me as I look back on my life, and I have tried to live my life in a way that would make up for the shame that I felt in that moment, that I'm aware of what I did was hurtful, and I realize, I was an immature person, and et cetera, right? If showed some sense of accountability, some sense of remorse, some awareness of that it's an injustice that has existed in society for an extended period of time, right? That women have had to live in society with this as a common feature, which has impacted their lives across the board, right? And in a myriad of ways that maybe we can't even fully comprehend, certainly as a society, and certainly as a man can't fully comprehend. If he had articulated that, I would think maybe it's good for a guy who has that type of awareness and understanding of what he doesn't understand and the damage that can be done in a way that is cavalier. Maybe that's a good judge, but all he has done, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. He has put indignity and injustice on top of indignity and injustice. And
you played a clip of somebody on Fox saying, well, he's clearly rehabilitated because it's been so long since he's done anything rapey. And they're sort of expressing a restorative theory of justice instead of a punitive one, I guess, although this isn't really a criminal case. But the only problem with that is in a restorative theory of justice where you focus on rehabilitating the perpetrator, one of the key aspects of that is apologizing to the victim. And confronting the victim and expressing, having the victim, first of all, express to you how what you did made them feel, and then being able to issue an apology directly to the victim. And if he's unable to do that, then he's clearly not rehabilitated. I mean,
absolutely.
I guess that's obvious, but
I also,
yeah. So anyways,
I also find it interesting.
Thanks for the show.
Thank you.
I also find it interesting how these Kavanaugh folks acknowledge that this is a very, very, very widespread thing, but instead of coming to the conclusion that feminists would come to and say, therefore, we really need to do something about it, their conclusion is, therefore, it's okay, which is just like mind-blowingly awful.
Right. This is a common thing. I mean, this happens all the time. Why are we making such a big deal? Kids will be kids type of situation. As opposed to like, hey, there's something going on with in youth that scars 50% of the population, and then we're supposed to pretend as a society that like they should just get over it.
Yeah, that's the most disturbing part of it.
But that's why when I look at that footage from that congressman running for the Senate in North Dakota, and see what he does, presumably, right, Republican women have been subjected to these same issues in their life. And, maybe they have been socialized to say like, well, it's your job. It's part of your job. That's part of your function. But I would imagine,
it's just the way things are.
Yeah, I don't know how there isn't a mass revolt, frankly. But take one more call. Calling from a 301 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sam, is that you?
Yes, it is.
It's Vito from Maryland. How are you?
Vito from Maryland. I'm well. How are you?
So, I just wanted to say, when I first saw this New York Times article with the Rosen Stein thing, like you, I think, perhaps, I was immediately sort of suspicious. This comes across to me as sort of contrived. I mean, I have no doubt that the New York Times reported this out as it was related to them, but I suspect a certain level of, in other words, I think this was sort of intentional. All
right, let me just catch everybody up with what you're talking about. The New York Times last Friday, I believe it was, had a story that was ostensibly from two people who knew about a conversation that that Rod Rosenstein was a part of 2 weeks after he was appointed acting attorney general, that in reaction to the president saying that his memo was the reason why Comey was fired, he had convened or had met or in the course of meeting with other people, including Andrew McCabe, suggested that they try and remove the president under the 25th Amendment, which I should tell you, the attorney general, the deputy attorney general is pretty lowly positioned to, initiate a conversation like that. But go ahead.
Right. And not to mention, he would definitely be someone who would understand the complexity and what would be required to remove the president under the 25th Amendment, which is, it's like, I don't know, it's the vice
extremely
president plus
difficult.
the cabinet,
Right.
and then of course he gets to say, hey, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm fine, and in which case it has to be like 2/3 of both houses. I mean, it's not conceivable to me that was relayed to anybody in any sort of serious way. I think that this was something that was intentionally given to the Times in order to give a pretext for, the president to sort of serve him up, to give him cause to
I think so.
fire him. And not only that, in which case, and of course, from there you go to trying to do away with the whole Mueller investigation. But I also think, I won't be surprised if we see in the not too distant future this type of thing on the campaign trail. In other words, the president going out to those, fascist rallies of his and saying, we have to get out there because the deep state is trying to get rid of me, and we have to save our democracy from the deep state. And you guys, this is all proof of. See what they're trying to do. They're trying to.
I think that's. I think you may be onto something in that regard too. It may or may not end up being the premise in which they fire Rosenstein, and there's a lot of reason to believe I mean, if they fire Rosenstein, it doesn't mean they necessarily fire Mueller. It just means that that person coming in to replace Rosenstein can severely handicap the Mueller investigation in a way that would not necessarily be transparent to those of us outside of it. And that could force the people in the Mueller investigation to start leaking stuff, and that could then end up being a premise as to why they should be fired, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's possible. Either one of those scenarios, we're going to have a better sense by the end of the week. I appreciate your call about it. Thanks, man.
Okay.
Here, well, let's go through some of this stuff. Let's start with the Avenatti stuff, because there was one thing that I wanted to touch on. I alluded to it at the beginning of the show, but I want to go a little deeper with this. So, look, I'm a little skeptical of Michael Avenatti, just broadly speaking, because he is he's a little flamboyant and hyperbolic, I guess. And, I think my sense is he's out there for Michael Avenatti, and, or at the very least, this is a guy who has a very high estimation of himself, and he thinks that he's personally defeating Donald Trump. He sent an email. Well, let's play this clip of him on Rachel Maddow, where he brings up what the gist of what he is pushing at the moment.
In this same matter, the other people who you're representing, other than your client, who I should mention you are not naming at this point, are they people who are witnesses to the behavior that she is going to describe? Or is this all one, are the people that you're representing here, is this all about one specific allegation?
No, it's not about one specific allegations. It's a series of allegations. This is a pattern of behavior, Rachel, that took place across many months and many years. And I will say this, we have demanded that Mark Judge be subpoenaed to testify before the committee in public so that the American people can hear Mark Judge answer questions about his close friend, Brett Kavanaugh. So far, those requests have fallen on deaf ears. For some reason, Chairman Grassley and others do not want the American people to hear from Mark Judge. For some reason, Brett Kavanaugh does not want the American people to hear from his close friend, Mark Judge. And I think that should tell people everything they need to know about Mark Judge and what he may say.
Now, you just said a moment ago that you expect your client will go public with these allegations within the next 48 hours. That sounds like you are doing that in advance of the hearing that, as of right now, is still scheduled for Thursday morning. Is that deliberate in terms of trying to make sure that these allegations are in the public eye before that hearing convenes on Thursday morning?
Well, that's one of the factors, absolutely, Rachel, and we've asked the committee to allow her to testify. We've asked the committee to turn this over to the FBI. Because, to your point earlier in the show, we believe all of these allegations, not just the allegations from my client, not just the allegations from the other clients that I have that are corroborating witnesses, but also Dr. Ford, Ms. Ramirez, and others. All of these allegations should be tested. They should be investigated by the FBI. There should not be a rush to judgment, either for or against Brett Kavanaugh. You know, Justice Scalia's seat was kept open for over 400 days, Rachel.
I mean, a part of what makes me a little skeptical of this guy is that he clearly is functioning outside of the realm of a lawyer to a more sort of like public political lawyer. And here are, but I will get to why I actually think there may be something here. First off, this is the questions that he has sent to the committee, and with suggestions of questions to ask Mark Judge. And if you, right there is good. And these are, questions that should be asked of Brett Kavanaugh. Did you ever target one or more women for sex or rape at a house party? Did you ever assist Mark Judge or others doing so? Did you ever attend a house party during which a woman was gang raped or used for sex by multiple men? Did you ever witness a line of men outside a bedroom at any house party where you understood a woman was in the bedroom being raped or taken advantage of? Did you ever participate in sexual conduct with a woman at a house party who you understood to be intoxicated or under the influence of drugs? Did you ever communicate with Mark Judge or anyone else about your participation in a train involving an intoxicated woman? Did you ever object or attempt to prevent one or more men from participating in the rep or taking advantage of a woman at any house party? All this alludes to Avenatti having a client who is aware that Brett Kavanaugh was at a house party, at multiple house parties, where Mark Judge was involved in getting a woman so drunk that she ended up having sex with multiple men at the party. Boys, men, whatever. 16, 17-year-olds, we don't know over exactly which time period. And how much Kavanaugh knew about this. And this, of course, is an issue because Mark Judge was in that room. And if Mark Judge has a history of, goading guys into doing this, he may very well have been goading Brett Kavanaugh into this, the virgin. And Kavanaugh, attempted to rape this woman. So I'll tell you why I'm not as skeptical as I might be. No one seems to be making this connection. I'm not sure why, but deep in the Farrow Mayer piece on Deborah Ramirez, there was this. After seeing Judge's denial, Elizabeth Razor, who met Judge at Catholic University, was in a relationship with him for about 3 years, said that she felt morally obligated to challenge his account that, quote, no horseplay took place at Georgetown Prep with women, end quote. Razor stressed that under normal circumstances, I wouldn't reveal information that was told in confidence. But she said, quote, I can't stand by and watch him lie. This is speaking of Mark Judge. In an interview with the New Yorker, she said, quote, Mark told me a very different story. Razor recalled that Judge had told her ashamedly. Remember now, they're having this conversation in college. Ashamedly of an incident that involved him and other boys taking turns having sex with a drunk woman.
That is to say,
so raping her.
That is to say, raping her.
Razor said that Judge seemed to regard it as fully consensual. Now, this is a guy who's feeling very guilty about his involvement in having sex with a woman who is drunk with other guys, but he's feeling guilty about it, but there was no reason to. It was totally consensual. But nevertheless, put aside the state of mind of this woman who was intoxicated. This guy, and it's hearsay, but we're not in a criminal court. This guy, there's hearsay evidence that he participated in this type of stuff. Another woman who attended high school in the 1980s in Montgomery County, Maryland, where Georgetown Prep is located, also refuted Judge's account of the social scene at the time. She sent a letter to Ford's lawyers saying that she had witnessed boys at parties that included Georgetown Prep students engaging in sexual misconduct. In an interview, the woman, who asked to have her name withheld for fear of political retribution, recalled that male students, quote, would get a female student blind drunk on what they called jungle juice, grain alcohol mixed with Hawaiian punch, and then try and take advantage of her. It was disgusting. They treated women like meat. So it seems to me that these two stories are not too far off from the description that is alluded to by Michael Avenatti. but they are more specific than the unnamed woman gave. And it's possible his client was Elizabeth Razor, but it sounds like a slightly different account. It sounds like they're describing the same events from a slightly different perspective. So we'll see. And we're going to know the answer to this, I think, in the next 48 hours. Before that hearing, if that hearing happens. But the idea that Mark Judge is now in a beach house somewhere, hiding out from reporters with a bunch of comic books, seems ludicrous. I mean, if you want to assess if this happened, shouldn't you bring in both the people who are accused of being there? Like, in the room?
Yeah, well-off white men cannot be charged as adults until they're at least 60. I don't know if any of you knew that. So
I was not aware that was the rule, but it sure feels like that.
Also, this, like, I know you said it before, but I just want to reiterate, this is not a trial. This is a job interview. People get rejected from job interviews for posting slutty pictures on social media. So, like, the standard is different than in a trial.
There was, and I'm trying to find it in the papers. I can't seem to find it now. I got it here. We should also put up this, and we'll get to this other story in a minute about him. But there's two developments in terms of, like, Kavanaugh's buddies that surrounded him. One is an update from the New Yorker story, wherein the original classmates who had signed on to who had given a statement and disputed Ramirez's claims. Debbie Ramirez withdrew their statements. And they initially had signed a statement of support for Kavanaugh provided by Kavanaugh's attorneys. They approached the New Yorker after this story was published and asked their names to be removed from the statement, saying they did not wish to dispute Ramirez's claims. Who knows? That statement that Ramirez didn't know what she was talking about is now signed by two of the men whom Ramirez alleged to had egged on Kavanaugh. So two of the accused have signed on saying that Kavanaugh didn't do any of that. The other thing you should be aware of, and Matt, I don't know if you have a copy of this. I'll send it to you now. That Kavanaugh's freshman roommate at Yale, now we're talking about the Ramirez accusations, a guy named James Roche, put out a statement. I was Brett Kavanaugh's roommate at Yale University in the fall of 1983. Remember, this is a guy who said, I drank, but I didn't,
Sunday school.
Yeah, Sunday school. We shared a 2-bedroom unit in the basement of Lawrence Hall on the old campus. Despite our living conditions, Brett and I did not socialize beyond the first few days of freshman year. We talked at night as freshman roommates do, and I would see him as he returned from nights without with his friends. It is from this experience that I concluded that although Brett was normally reserved, he was a notably heavy drinker, even by the standards of the time. I got news for you. In the mid-'80s, at the school I went to, not known as a party school, we had Monday night kegs. We had Wednesday night kegs. We had Thursday night kegs. We had Friday night official party and alternate kegs. Saturday night official party and alternate kegs. And occasionally Sunday night kegs, if somebody had one left over. I don't know if it was like that at Yale, but I can tell you contemporaneous just down the road in New London, Connecticut, it was like that. We drank a lot at that time. In fact, in Connecticut at that time, the drinking age would have been 18. So relative to the standards of the time, I can tell you there was a lot of drinking. So he was a notably heavy drinker, even by the standards of that time, and that he became aggressive and belligerent when he was very drunk. I did not observe the specific incident in question, but I do remember Brett frequently drinking excessively and becoming incoherently drunk. I became close friends with Debbie Ramirez shortly after we both arrived at Yale. She stood out as being exceptionally honest with a trusting manner. As we got to know each other, I discovered Debbie was very worried about fitting in. She felt that everyone at Yale was very rich, very smart, very sophisticated, and as a Puerto Rican woman from a less privileged background, she was an outsider. Her response was to try harder to make friends and get along. Based with my time at Debbie, I believe her to be unusually honest and straightforward, and I cannot imagine her making this up. Based on my time with Brett, I believe that he and his social circle were capable of the actions that Debbie described. Debbie described a situation where she was quite drunk and remembers Brett Kavanaugh basically reinserting his penis after putting his penis in her face while she was, I think, lying on the floor. Again, you know, to show no contrition about these things. Had he shown some measure of contrition, could have been a very different situation. One more thing that came out was this story of a woman who at the time, her last name was Renate. And New York Times has a story that says, Brett Kavanaugh's page in high school yearbook offers a glimpse of the teenage years of the man, now President Trump, Supreme Court nominee. Lots of football, plenty of drinking, parties at the beach.
A lot of blackout drunk jokes.
Yeah.
Who won anyway?
Which, look, you know, again, the idea of looking at someone's yearbook to determine who they are as an adult is ludicrous. Unless you're trying to establish a pattern of behavior to determine whether one incident could or could not have happened. And the elements of making this decision, again, as Jamie says, whether or not you're going to hire someone for a job, not whether you're going to go to jail. You assess the credibility of the accuser. You assess the credibility of the accused. You also assess what the accused says about these accusations and how they describe how they were at that time. And if it matches up with physical or written or documented evidence or others' testimony about that time. That's the way you tell the credibility of this witness. You may not be able to know whether or not he engaged in the behavior he is accused of, but you can maybe assess whether he's being truthful about what he was doing broadly at that time. And if there's a disparity between what everyone else around him said he was doing and what he says, then it starts to cut into his credibility about his denials about the initial accusation. At least enough to say, like, hey, you know this job that we have, which we reserve for like the most 9 judicious people in the country at any given time, who are going to determine the fate of millions of people, perhaps, for the next couple of decades at least. Maybe we should have a slightly higher standard. Like, you got to be more or less consistent and accurate to the facts about a lot of different things. Maybe things that aren't even that important. Like, put aside even the accusations. If for some reason someone said, like, hey, man, were you a blackout drunk in high school? And he says, no, I never.
Captain of the basketball
I was
team.
reading the Bible.
And then all this other stuff around him came out. That, to me, would be enough to say, like, I don't know if we can trust this guy. Like, if he can't even cop to being a blackout drunk in high school, what else is he not copping to?
Well, there's some gambling questions.
So the word Renate appears 14 times in the Georgetown Preparatory School's 1983 yearbook, on individuals' pages, in a group photo of 9 football players, including Judge Kavanaugh, who were described as Renate alumni. It's a reference to Renate Schroeder, then a student at a nearby Catholic girls' school. 2 of Judge Kavanaugh's classmates say the mentions of Renate were part of the football players' unsubstantiating boasting about their conquests. Sean Hagan, a Georgetown prep student at the time, says they were very disrespectful, at least verbally, with Renate. I can't express how disgusted I am with them then and now. Kavanaugh's lawyer came out and said, well, the reason why her name was in his yearbook, said it was only mentioned because Kavanaugh and Dolphin, that's Schroeder's, now I guess married name, attended an event in high school together. Judge Kavanaugh was friends with Renate Dolphin in high school. He admired her very much then, and he admires her to this day. Judge Kavanaugh and Ms. Dolphin attended one high school event together and shared a brief kiss. Good night following that event. They had no other such encounter. The language for Judge Kavanaugh's high school refers to that incident. So this guy and the other 9 football players were talking about their conquest of getting a kiss from Renate.
This is like how Michael Bloomberg said, I may have said I'd do her, but when I said I'd do her, I meant I'd have a personal relationship with her.
Right.
Yeah, I'd go for coffee
Like
and
an
talk about
alumni.
books with her.
It means kiss.
So, like,
and do
okay,
her means chamomile
put
tea.
aside everything else. The guy can't come out and say, you know what? I was incredibly immature. He's willing to say he was a virgin. So why can't he say, I was a virgin. I wanted to fit in with the other football players. I wanted to make it seem like I was cool. What I did was incredibly immature and cruel and mean and childish. And it was a function of a kid who was insecure and trying to be one of the cool kids. And I learned that lesson early in life, that I have to be me, and I appreciate this, and it makes me more sensitive to the suffering of other people and understanding why people do sometimes horrible things, but they should have the opportunity to, redeem themselves. And I can't apologize enough to Renate Dolphin, and I'm disgusted by my behavior then, and I hope that I'm a better person now. Like, these things you're capable of saying. But for an adult to assume that other adults are going to believe that he and these football players consider themselves Renate alumni because he had kissed her at a dance, I mean...
They're just cataloging their puppy love.
I mean, honestly, like... are they that stupid? Do they think we're that stupid?
Yes and yes.
I just don't understand.
That is actually a great reflection of the American aristocracy.
Yeah, and there's a subset of the population that will believe it's fake news if Trump and company say it is, no matter how much evidence there is.
It's a stunning story. It's a stunning story because they're trying to push it, and it's a stunning story because they expect people to believe it, and it's, wow. So Kavanaugh was on Fox News last night because, God forbid, you sit down and have the FBI investigate it when you can have Fox News do it. And I will say, that as far as these things go on Fox News, Martha McCallum, I thought, did a pretty good interview. I also, though, will say this, that it's clear to me there's two things why they wanted this interview. I don't think the reason why they wanted this interview was because they wanted Kavanaugh to answer these questions. I think they wanted this interview on Fox to foam the runway for the Fox audience to hear these allegations. And to hear them so they weren't shocked by it the first time they would hear it maybe in the course of the hearings. Because they haven't heard these allegations. There's no way the vast majority of the Fox viewers have heard these allegations. So Kavanaugh goes in there and he is completely trained to say that, to say a couple of catchphrases. Do we have the one where he repeats himself? Do we have that? This is number 5. Okay. We will look at specific answers, but this is the first one where Kavanaugh basically repeats a phrase over and over again, which leads me to believe that he was kept within very narrow parameters. And the idea they told him was like, this is not for us to hear your full answers. This is for us to get this audience used to hearing the allegations.
And Deborah Ramirez was a freshman at Yale. She says she was at a dorm party and this happened, quote, Brett was laughing. I can still see his face and his hips coming forward like when you pull up your pants. I'm confident about the pants coming up and I'm confident about Brett being there. She was initially uncertain it was you, they write in this piece, but after 6 days she's confident enough, she says. Should the American people view her as credible?
I never did any such thing. Never did any such thing. The other people alleged to be there don't recall any such thing. If such a thing had happened, it would have been the talk of campus. The women I knew in college and the men I knew in college says it's inconceivable that I could have done such a thing. And the New York Times has reported that just last week, the person making the accusation was calling other classmates saying she was not sure that I had done this. Again, just asking for a fair process where I can be heard and I can defend my integrity.
He said the words, I'm looking for a fair process, and I never did such a thing, about a dozen times over the course of 12 minutes. Now, incidentally, what he said in that answer is demonstrably untrue. People who did know him did think he was capable of such things, like his roommate who put out a statement.
Yeah, but his roommate was a loser.
No kidding. Like, the guy just lied in his answer of his defense by saying, I'm not lying. Here's proof. I'm lying. I'm lying when I say that. His roommate, among other people. Two of those people who had supposedly signed on to that statement that his lawyer was talking about took their name off that statement. So
it's very conceivable.
I mean,
a lot of people are conceiving of these things.
I don't know if they care, because if I'm a Democratic senator and I'm allowed to ask questions as opposed to a Republican lawyer on this committee, I'm going to say, the other night I watched your interview with Martha McCallum. You said that no one who knew you thought you were capable of those things, yet we have this statement from your roommate. That should be a question. We shall see. Here is Brett Kavanaugh trying to make the argument that he couldn't have possibly been involved in a gang rape because he was a virgin for many years after high school. Like I said earlier, I think the reason why he is raising this is because he is aware that Michael Avenatti does in fact have a person who is aware that Kavanaugh was aware that his buddy Mark Judge was involved or instigating gang rapes of highly inebriated women, girls, at the time, as substantiated by a story in the New Yorker magazine But let's listen to Judge Kavanaugh's defense.
And another accuser who claims that you and Mark Judge at multiple house parties in the Washington, D.C. area during the 1980s would participate in the targeting of women with alcohol and drugs to allow a train of men to subsequently gang rape them. There are multiple witnesses that will corroborate these facts, and each of them must be called to testify publicly. Did you ever participate in, or were you ever aware of any gang rape that happened at a party that you attended?
That's totally false and outrageous. Never done any such thing, known about any such thing. When I was in high school, and I went to an all-boys Catholic high school, a Jesuit high school, where I was focused on academics and athletics, going to church every Sunday at Little Flower, working on my service projects, and friendship with my fellow classmates, and friendship with girls from the local all-girls Catholic schools. And yes, there were parties, and the drinking age was 18, and yes, the seniors were legal and had beer there. And yes, people might have had too many beers on occasion, and people generally in high school, I think all of us have probably done things we look back on in high school and regret or cringe a bit, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an allegation of sexual assault. I've never sexually assaulted anyone. I did not have sexual intercourse or anything close to sexual intercourse in high school or for many years thereafter. And the girls from the schools I went to and I were friends.
So you're saying that through all these years that are in question, you were a virgin?
That's correct.
Never had sexual intercourse with anyone in high school?
Correct.
And through what years in college, since we're probing into your personal life here?
Many years after. I'll leave it at that. Many years after. And the people I went to high school with, the girls and the boys, now men and women that I went to high school with, I was good friends with them, and we remain good friends. That's how 65 people on a moment's notice, 65 women, it's 220 people total, men and women, who knew me in high school.
They should keep him off of media completely. I mean, my God, is he his own worst advocate? I mean, when you keep outlining these hypothetical scenarios of like what he could have done in order to be like, I grew or I learned, or even frankly, this is a total lie and I'm outraged. Like, none of that is like I want to start investigating this guy for like everything. I mean, I wonder if he was involved in contract hits on people.
Right.
This is
you start
weirdo.
Watching him. Like, you start to think, like, I wonder if there's a pathology involved here.
That's what I'm saying.
That is deeper than we may have ever imagined.
That's what I'm saying. It's like you go from saying, like,
and
okay.
Look, here's what we do also know as a fact, right? That this guy asked Monica Lewinsky, a 21-year-old girl, time and time again, how many times did the president come in your mouth? Berated this woman. This altar boy. Like, things start to get a little bit creepy when you put all this stuff together with this guy. And that his best friend, for many of these years, is a blackout drunk who is hiding out in a beach house right now so that he doesn't testify for his good friend's opportunity to get to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I think they should put him up on TV and let him keep on digging the hole as deep as he possibly can. And if he still gets on the Supreme Court after this, that just further shows how illegitimate the system really is.
Yeah.
I want Mark Judge to testify.
Oh, yeah.
Judge. We need Judge.
We need a judge in this courtroom.
No one asked Mike Judge. No one asked Mark Judge.
Let's just look at one more moment from this Kavanaugh interview, because we're going to see a lot of this on Thursday, presuming the hearing actually happens. Kavanaugh, this is where he's going to try and seem like a normal human being. You tell me. You decide. We report, you decide. Here it is.
Court, I am the leading federal judge in the country, the leader in the entire country of promoting women law clerks to get Supreme Court clerkships. For the last 7 years, I've been coaching girls basketball.
Pause it for 1 second. It is true about the clerkships, I believe. And as we know, there's a certain look that Judge Kavanaugh likes with his clerks. That
two ladies clerk here.
I mean, that has been reported.
Well, no, Amy Chua joked about it, and Amy Chua is one of his character witnesses.
Right.
And she's at Yale Law, so it's not just a rumor.
It's not a beauty contest. It's a scholarship program.
Maybe she's uninformed, but she did reference it with regards to her own daughter. It's not like it's out of the ether.
Let's go.
Basketball. Ask the moms.
So what do you think is happening?
Hold on, back up. This is like a weird. This is like a weird little. Yeah, let's just let this run because that's an interesting pregnant pause there.
To get Supreme Court clerkships. For the last 7 years, I've been coaching girls basketball. Ask the moms.
So what do you think is happening?
You better ask somebody. I don't know, but I want a fair process where I can defend my integrity, and I know I'm telling the truth. I know my lifelong record, and I'm not going to let false accusations drive me out of this process. I have faith in God, and I have faith in the fairness of the American people. America's about fairness and hearing from both sides, and I didn't do this or anything resembling this. This is wrong.
So you are going to be pressed on something that you just said about people do things in high school, and you were all drinking. Were there times when perhaps you drank so much? Was there ever a time that you drank so much that you couldn't remember what happened the night before?
No, that never happened.
You never said to anyone, I don't remember anything about last night?
No, that did not happen.
Did you ever have any sense that any kind of the description of the behavior that I just described with these, women being taken into rooms and raped or having sex with a number of men, consensual or otherwise, that was going on at the parties that you were at?
I never saw any such thing. Any such thing. I certainly never participated in any such thing, but I never saw or heard of any such thing. And I was focused on trying to be number one in my class, and being captain of the varsity basketball team, and doing my service projects, going to church. The vast majority of time I spent in high school was studying or focused on sports and being a good friend to the boys and the girls that I was friends with. We have these great lifelong friendships that are fantastic, and supporting each other through the ups and downs of life. And they're an awesome group of people.
I wonder what they were talking about. What happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep. The friendships. We're not going to tell anybody about how I was so dogged about getting to be the captain of the basketball team and number one in my class. Remember, that stays there. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about that.
Kisses, friendship, academics, and God.
Something doesn't this is the problem. This guy's out there trying to sell himself as Jesus,
Pope,
right? This guy sounds like the Pope now. And we have his college roommate talking about this guy being completely beyond normal level of inebriation. And this guy's just talking about a couple of beers.
But he goes to church so much, and no one who goes to church has ever abused a child.
Never.
Look.
Certainly not in Catholic church.
We all know that identities for high school students are transient, but I don't quite understand the bit. If you and all your friends are simultaneously not drinking and going to church all the time, and also making it a big part of your yearbook questions are about forgetting major events for drinking and kegs and stuff like that.
You know what I want someone to ask him? What was the name of that club that you were in? What was the nickname of that club? Was it Tit and Clit? I would like to hear him have to respond to that for this choir boy. What does 100 keggers mean? What does that mean in high school?
That means I was a square and I was just envious of all the drinking going on around me and wanted to present that in my yearbook.
Right, because no one in my crew would know that I wasn't at those kegs getting drunk. If I put it in my yearbook, they would look back on their memories and say like, oh yeah, I guess old Brett, who we called a super nerd because he was always going to try and be number one in his class.
And not come to the rape parties.
This stuff does not, the more this guy is out there, you understand why they wanted to do this so quick. Because the more that's out there, he's incapable of telling the truth about this stuff, even the stuff that's not bad, because he's trying to project some type of image. But the question has to be like, why do you feel like you have to create this wall where you're a perfect person?
I mean, I think that's
like,
really...
what is it that you're trying to avoid being tagged with?
Right, because it gets, I mean, yeah, it gets really dark between, like, even just things that are unacceptable, but you could, like, how many people, you know, in that high school could you pull out and they could say, oh my God, I was involved in some, you know, stuff that was unacceptable. Everybody. This guy, it's like, I mean, yeah, I shouldn't keep saying it. Maybe it's sloppy of me, but I'm like, I want to know what's happening like today with this guy. like his apartment before he went and took the town car for that interview.
Really?
Is he going to return some videotapes? Maybe check his business cards for. I'm making American Psycho references. I'm sorry.
Huh. Calling from a 215 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, hi Sam. It's Mindy. How are you?
Mindy, how are you?
Good. There's so much material here. I don't know what to talk about first. But first, I just wanted to say about the New York Times piece with Michael Schmidt. Why is nobody thinking that that was a setup between the White House and Michael Schmidt to do that at that particular moment?
I mean, I don't, you know, I think people are.
Well, nobody's connected it that I've heard. I mean, I haven't heard it anywhere. But I immediately, I thought of it because isn't he the Maggie Haberman group thing? Aren't they with the Maggie Haberman? Isn't he that guy?
Yeah, I mean, they may have been a little bit too credulous. I mean, clearly what happened is they wrote that piece. They got their, they were not reporting facts. They were reporting the assessment of people who were made aware of the facts by people who were there. So they got it third hand. And
right, so which I think, in my opinion, I feel like Michael Schmidt is using his credentials to do a false narrative on a story, just like the timing was perfect just because of Kavanaugh and everything. I just think he used his credentials to invoke a riot with the country. That's just what I feel.
I think you're right. I mean, I think like this is when people complain about the Times and about the coverage they sometimes give. This is what they're complaining about.
Right. Like, okay, so that's one thing that's my opinion on that. And the other thing is with this Kavanaugh thing, first of all, he's creepy as fuck. I mean, he's just super creepy. Before he even started talking, he just looked creepy. But I have one girlfriend left that's a Republican. Don't yell at me. I know. She gives me great restaurants and movies, and we try not to talk about politics. But just as a woman last week, I just texted her and I said, Andy, what do you think about, like, how do you feel about this Kavanaugh thing? And she, like, went off on me for, like, a half an hour about how it's bullshit, boys will be boys will be, and all that whole story. You cannot sway them. Even if you can have lunch with these people and discuss movies and stuff like that, you cannot sway them. They're just not swayable. I mean, there are also women that are also like sort of like held like a second class citizens to their husband. Like I remember this summer she texted me and she said, oh, Ira and I were in Starbucks and his coffee latte, whatever shit he drinks, spilled over and it got all over my white clothes, and Ira turned to me and said, shit, I need to get another coffee. Like whereas like a normal husband, like my Like my husband, a normal guy would have said, "Oh my God, let me wipe that off you." So
the first reaction is like, I got to get another coffee.
Wait, what was that guy's name again? Ira?
okay, Ira.
There's
Okay,
a lot
so
of balls
her
for an Ira.
I forgot how
What?
Mindy loves to bury her neighbors.
Oh,
No,
I
she's
need
not my
more
neighbor.
coffee
Oh my God.
now. Get out of my way.
Dox mentality. It's like women. They're in a culture of being the second class citizen. Like, oh my God, it's Ira's coffee, not like my white outfit's all ruined.
Or any outfit, or I've just got hot coffee spilled on me.
No,
like when I spill coffee on somebody, my first reaction is, "Oh my God, I hope I didn't burn you."
Oh, I thought it was. I hope they have more coffee at the commissary.
I hope there's more coffee.
Because if there isn't, I'll get
no,
all
that's
sorts
my last
of
cup of
cranky.
coffee.
Oh no, and then I'll get a headache.
Yeah, but it's a different kind of. These women are like trained
Yeah.
a different way,
Yep,
and
yep.
they're just like wired differently. They don't think anything's wrong with boys being boys. There's absolutely nothing you can do to change their mind. Period. Nothing. I mean, I could talk to her for 3 weeks straight and not let her leave the room, and I can't move her an inch.
No.
Do you think there's also an element of like, I put up with all this crap, so everybody else should too?
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, the next part of when Iris spilled coffee on her was she was going to take the charge and go to Neiman Marcus and buy 2 pairs of shoes to tell them to fuck off. Yeah, I mean, that's the second part of it. But, they just live in, Jamie, they live in this little bubble where they have everything they want. They drive the cars they want. They live where they want. They have the shore house, the whole bit. And this is just part of it. If your husband says you're a Republican, you're a Republican. If your husband says vote Republican, you vote Republican. If your husband says boys will be boys, they should drink and rape girls and lets them line up outside the door, that's fine, because that's what they do. And they don't care if their kids do it. The same with their kids. No, it was just a baby. He was just a kid when he got in trouble in college. That's the things that they say. Like, they don't hold anybody accountable. And the richer they are, and the whiter they are, the less accountable they need to be.
I don't know what to add, Mindy. Thank you.
I mean, do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay, so last thing, Connor from Pennsylvania
Yeah.
wants a little encouragement. He wants to run for office. So, do you know who I'm talking about?
No, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, Connor from PA. He's going to call you. He wants to run for office. He needs help on getting started. Well, I think he wants to talk to Jamie about the DSA.
Okay.
I would
So
talk
look
to
for-
I would talk to you for some campaign strategy
know
as
any-
well. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Hey, I heard, what's her name? That crazy bitch in California. She's on Sirius Radio 127, 9 to 12.
I don't
With
know.
Stephanie Miller. I heard she quoted one of my tweets the other day.
Oh, she did? Well, I mean, you should be
Oh,
a little
maybe you
bit-
should intro her a little more
Yeah,
nicely.
exactly.
What?
The way to do that
What
is
did
like,
you just
I
say?
heard that esteemed radio host who does 9 to 12 on Sirius quoted my tweet the other
No,
day.
I like
Not
that. Hey, I heard that
bitch.
dumb fuck
Term
at
of endearment.
TYT quote tweeted an article I just published. What an idiot.
Okay, I'll try. I'll take your advice and I'll try to reword that next time better. Okay.
Good job, though,
I'm
Mindy.
pissed off about Kavanaugh. I'm in a really bad mood.
Yeah.
This thing is just affecting me. All right.
You
You guys
know,
have a great day. And
appreciate
that's all
the
I
call.
had to contribute. And
Thank you. That was great.
Shout out to everyone, including Ronald Reagan.
Ooh, a thaw. A major diplomatic breakthrough, and I think Trump could talk about at the UN.
My sense is, and anecdotally, I think there's a lot of women out there who, particularly like the Renate thing, I think really pushed people over the edge. Because I don't think anyone.
The time bomb character, like dynamic of that Renate thing is so brutal. Like that yearbook becomes newsworthy, and all of a sudden you're forced to realize, like, why is my name appearing in all these boys' yearbook?
Yeah, she didn't know about this until the reporters saw the name and approached her.
Hey. I also think a lot of this stuff goes back to economics, which is why it's hard to say all women have common interests when one class of women is oppressing the rest of us. So, like, maybe it makes sense that their fealty to, their rich husbands and their own position in society overtakes their responsibilities to other women.
We have some breaking news, by the way. Bill Cosby is sentenced to 3 to 10 years in state prison for 2004 sexual assault.
Wow.
Doop-a-doop. Doop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doop. Gotta pull up your pants. Going. That's actually a place where you actually do call it commissary.
This is
and it actually makes sense.
Quite the week.
Doop-a-doo-a-doo.
Quite the week. Let's just break up this claims of horridness with a little levity, ladies and gentlemen. Let's take a moment just to laugh.
This is its own form of horridness.
A classical liberal is someone who, well, I mean, let me rephrase this. Dave Rubin would have you believe that a classical liberal, and I think to a certain extent there's some truth to this, is someone who is open to all sides and is wants there to be sort of a liberalization, if you will, of the political and societal discourse, right? That's what I think Dave Rubin would have us believe a classical liberal is. There's some other elements too that, but for the sake of just talking about Dave Rubin, I think that's what he means. That's why free speech is such an important issue for him, even if he disagrees with it. It is an open door on either side, and that's why not being on teams is so important. Shouldn't be putting labels, well, not labels, but teams, not good. You don't want to be too much associated with anything. So someone tweeted, Dave Rubin, I don't know who he's referring to, but apparently he thinks that the term reactionary right is a new term in political discourse. I suppose if one has not been reading much, one might believe that. I don't know. It's something I've heard for decades now.
As I always say with Dave Rubin, I believe that Dave Rubin believes that that's new.
Right. And he says, I quite like their new term, reactionary right. Remember now, he is a classical liberal. It's a signal that calling everyone far right and alt-right doesn't work anymore. I will tell you that I don't know between far right and reactionary right, which is an older term. My guess is reactionary right probably is an older term. It is certainly a decades older term than alt-right.
Yeah, I'd say reactionary right and far right are synonyms.
Well, perhaps. But I'm saying in terms of like how old the term is colloquially used, because that's what he's saying. His argument is like this reactionary right is a new term because they can't get away with calling everyone far right and alt right. It doesn't work anymore because it doesn't have any salience in the narrow confines of Dave's mind or social circle. Plus, being reactionary is good. When you see something wrong, you take it upon yourself to do something about it. I'm reactionary about freedom. So Dave has no idea that there exists a term, reactionary right. He does not know that it is someone who describes someone who is almost exactly the opposite of the way that he refers to himself as. There is probably no greater opposite to a classical liberal than a reactionary. Someone who is against any type of social or political, maybe even cultural liberalization.
Yeah, but you're jealous and not interested in ideas.
If you just heard the phrase, I'm reactionary about freedom, if somebody told you that, where would you peg their ideological allegiances?
As being a measured proponent of an open society.
I wouldn't even. I wouldn't even know how to.
I think what you're hinting at might be fascist, which I agree, but that would still be assigning a level of competence to these people that just doesn't. I mean, in his case, just doesn't exist. I mean, he's very good at doing these meandering.
But he's thinking of the word reactive.
Yeah, I know. But he's not intelligent.
When he sees freedom, he acts definitively to get rid of it.
Now,
so that makes me think.
What's hilarious about that is that his followers also don't seem to get it because he wasn't ratioed at all in that. He had 4,000 likes, 478 retweets, and about 150 replies. And then what did he do? He deleted the...
He deleted it, and he doesn't appear to have addressed why. I'm looking through his Twitter right now.
Maybe we should help him out.
Yeah,
his boyfriend,
we should tweet
or his husband.
The OED entry at him.
I would be willing to bet you $1 million. His husband did not tell him that it was like somebody else, like Ben Shapiro was like.
Well, it could be, but Anna gave me in Anna's scoop. It sounds like he gets some guidance, but whatever from many different.
Oh, that's good. Well, his producer. Okay,
yeah,
fair
producer.
Enough.
Do you remember this though?
Bad move for conservatives to be circling the wagons around Bill Maher right now. He's the last mainstream liberal who calls out his own side and defends free speech. Take him out and it all gets worse, including for you. So,
what?
And then he writes after that, couple of folks correctly saying my wagons analogy isn't quite right here. In fact, it's like 180 degrees wrong. Should be more like sharks sensing blood.
God.
Even
He's
that's
so
kind
dumb.
of that's iffy.
Yeah.
If you said it would be like, but no, because
conservatives shouldn't be sending or sensing blood in the waters.
Right. There you go.
Or
right,
conservatives shouldn't be circling the sharks if they controlled sharks through like some type of mind meld. But there it is. That is your Dave Rubin not so bright moment. Boop-a-doop-a-doop-boop.
How is he so dumb? And he makes so much
we don't
money.
say that.
I hate it.
That's
I hate
rude.
It. Is that ableist?
That's rude. That's rude.
Right.
It shouldn't be. It shouldn't
Wait
be
a second.
ableist
Why
to
is
Dave
it?
Rubin.
Am I the only one whose freedom of speech is oppressed around here by talking about? All right.
Jamie,
fair
when
enough.
you express, when you freely exchange that idea, it shuts down the free expression of ideas for all of us.
Right.
Totally.
Exactly.
My bad.
Yeah. He needs to be able to freely express being a fucking idiot.
Ladies and gentlemen, sad thing happened to the Cruz family last night. They went out to a restaurant in D.C. and apparently a group of hecklers, members of the Smash Racism D.C. group, who are, I guess, supporters of Antifa, had the audacity of yelling, "We believe supporters" to Ted Cruz. It's this type of survivors to Ted Cruz as the couple exited the restaurant. It is this type of creeping fascism, ladies and gentlemen, that we must be very, very careful of.
We believe survivors! We believe survivors! We believe survivors! We believe survivors! We believe survivors!
Beto is way hotter than you do. We believe survivors!
Pause it. I just want to flag that.
Oh, this poor prick.
First off, they're leaving the restaurant, and I would always say to people who are protesting, particularly a senator, don't get in any type of too close a physical proximity, just because that's too easy to make it look like you're being going beyond the pale. I think it's perfectly legitimate to go into a restaurant and politically protest, because it's not like you're taking a knee during the anthem or anything, but you don't want to get into a situation where anybody can claim that they were assaulted by you. And a guy like Ted Cruz would do that. But I just wanted to also note that someone just said Beto is way hotter than you. And that's going to have some salience after this.
We believe survivors.
Beto is way hotter than you do.
We believe survivors. We believe survivors. We believe survivors.
God bless you.
Excuse me. Let my wife through.
We believe survivors.
For God,
We believe survivors. 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 Sexist, racist, anti-gay. We believe survivors. We believe survivors. We believe survivors.
Leave the premises. It's a private space.
Yeah, the mission here is completed.
They're gone. We're done.
Yeah, they can finish their meal. They don't have
But
to go anywhere.
look, folks,
gotta listen
it's
little bit.
easy to sit here and say, "Oh, it's funny that Matt." It's funny that Ted Cruz got driven out of a restaurant. I'm sure some of you are super heartless. I think that's a laugh riot. Like, oh, whatever.
He's still hungry. Oh.
And you probably think like, oh, it's mean to say that Beto is way hotter than you. Or no, that it's not mean.
Max,
That
don't
it's
care
not
about your
gonna impact him. He's a senator. He's okay. Well, Beto is way hotter than you, dude. Business Insider reports Ted Cruz and his wife leave restaurant after being heckled. And then, shortly thereafter, per Politico, Ted Cruz was spotted on his phone on a flight back from D.C. looking at a picture of Beto O'Rourke.
Aw.
Yo. Could you imagine from like the cucking of Trump to now like the cucking of... That's not even... That's like Beto with the assist just by being...
By not being a disconcerting monster that children cry when they see. What?
I think I think it's going to be. I don't know how this race is going to turn out in Texas. I don't know. I don't have a sense. I really don't. Go either way.
I think Beto's going to win.
But I will tell you this. Well, let's play this. This is
It's a highlight from the primaries.
This is a highlight.
Wait.
from the
Only do we follow it with the calling thing? All right, go ahead.
I don't get angry often. But you mess with my wife, you mess with my kids, that'll do it every time. Donald, you're a sniveling coward, and leave Heidi the hell alone.
So will you support him as the nominee?
I'm going to beat him for the nomination.
That's not answering the question, Senator.
I am
respectfully.
answering the question. Donald Trump will not be the nominee.
He's leading right now. You just
Donald
looked in that
Trump will
camera
not
and
be
said
the
he is a
nominee.
coward. Will you support him as the nominee?
Donald Trump will not be the nominee.
There you go. What do you say the chances are that if Ted Cruz loses, how long before do you think his wife leaves him?
I'm going to take probably within the month or so. Can I get in on this? Trump just starts calling up shows.
I'd say over 2 years, but under 4.
There might be some, yeah. It's going to be very calibrated. Look at what I just sent, though. Maybe just that
Give it an
picture
interval.
as well. We could just add to the mix to really complete the cycle here. Oh, yeah. I mean, this almost... I mean, it doesn't make me feel bad for Ted Cruz, but if anything could.
Sad Ted Cruz.
Vote banks for Donald Trump. This is like a couple of months
Yeah.
after that moment.
Oh man, the true silver lining to the rise of Trump is probably this photo.
I got time for one more phone call. I call from an 801 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 801? 801, going once, going twice. Gone. Let's call from a 702 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, can you hear me?
Yeah, more or less. Who's this?
Hey, it's Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
I'm sorry, who is it?
Sam?
Yeah?
Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas. What's on your mind?
Hey, Sam. Number one, I just want to shout out to Mike real quick. I saw that Mehdi Hassan interview with Steven Pickner He destroyed him. That was crazy.
That was a great interview.
I mean, he just destroyed him. It really was. Because you said, he took him down, but it was more like just owning Stephen Pinkner. And it was funny, too, because Stephen Pinkner had, a lot of Pinkner bots in the comment section. But whatever. About the Brett Kavanaugh thing, I have just a couple points about this. Look, from Molester Moonves, he finally got taken down. Molester Moonves, finally, thank God.
Right.
To Donald Trump, to Brett Kavanaugh, it's like a professional courtesy among rapists. There's this whole culture here. These guys are all in power. They all got to protect each other. Just full stop. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like these guys are almost super citizens. You can't prosecute these guys. There's a whole rank and file rubes and idiots who support these guys. You have to remove the malignant majority if we're ever going to get anywhere. And by the way, this also extends to Democrat. I mean, to quote unquote, I guess, I don't want to say Democrats, but look, for example, look at the New York Times.
I mean, this is bipartisan problem. This is a bipartisan problem. There's no doubt.
Full stop.
It's no doubt. The only difference I would say that institutionally, the parties are reacting very differently. It's not so. In other words, there are Democratic men who surely are guilty of stuff like this. But as a party, the Democrats are doing a much better job in responding, at least in these sort of public facing things.
Yeah, they don't circle the wagons the way the Republicans do, to use that phrase correctly.
Right. I mean, look, Al Franken as a perfect example.
Right.
And that, historically, has it been true? But I'm saying in this day and age, look, there's at least two women on the Judiciary Committee, 3, and they're Democrats. So,
but at the same time, though, Sam, I agree with you. But here's the thing: has progress been made? Absolutely. I'm talking about in terms of the Democrats. But for example, I remember you brought this up, and I completely agree with you, where you had the political incompetence of Dianne Feinstein just sitting on this stuff.
Yeah.
Or for example, you look at the New York Times, right? You look at the New York Times. I'll never forget this. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure. Especially now, in the light of everything that's happened, this is especially galling. Do you remember the New York Times that the article that was the liberal case for Kavanaugh? Are you fucking serious? Pardon my language. Are you crazy?
That guy, I think that guy has recanted. I'm pretty sure that guy who wrote that op-ed has recanted. I don't know if we were talking about the same guy, but one of them definitely recanted.
And you have morons and rubes like Amy Chua sitting there, stumping for. I mean, look. Basically, ultimately what I'm trying to say. I'm sorry, I'll wrap it up soon. But ultimately, what I'm trying to say is the malignant majority just has, especially these old white guys. You know what I'm saying? I mean, let's just be clear. A lot of this is also white supremacy. I just think, because it's just you can't prosecute these guys. Or you can prosecute these guys to get a severance package and they move on to, like you said, to the beach house and just retire. You really need to start putting these guys need to be prosecuted. And by the way, one more little thread, because you mentioned something, Sam. Oh, it's not lost on me that the culture of the Catholic Church and this guy, there's a relation here. I don't say it needs to be explored, but there's definitely a link here. The culture of the Catholic Church, sex abuse, and all this stuff, and he's just a good old guy. He goes to church.
I don't listen. I don't know if I would make that connection necessarily, but I will say this: I definitely don't have time to go down that road. So I gotta go. Right. But I appreciate your points, and I think you're right up to that point. I don't know. Thanks for the call. I don't know if you can draw a line from that. I don't know.
Well, it's not just the Catholic Church. It's and it's not all religion. It's not all Christianity. But we saw this with the Duggar case. We've seen this with
the Mormon Church has a thing.
We saw this with Bristol Palin. Her story about how she lost her virginity. It sounds very rapey. When you see all premarital sex as sin, and you put it all in that basket, it's a lot harder to differentiate between consent and non-consent.
And I would argue that we're talking about institutions that are all, a virulent part of the patriarchy. And to the extent that they're not, those are relatively recent reforms. And for the most part, they still are. All right, let me go through some IMs here. And then we'll go. Drummer Dave. Hey, MR listeners. My band, Sexual Event, is playing Wednesday at the Red Hook VFW Hall. Please come check us out and use the phrase booze party for discounted entry. If I had a babysitter, we're having babysitter problems. Attorney Andrew. Thoughts on Nomi Kantz running for New York City Public Advocate? It's exciting. I love Sarah Palin. I need to start my own YouTube channel. Green Party is a tool of the George Soros-funded MoveOn.org. Dore is a fucking corporate sellout and a voting out of fear. I'm a real progressive, but we want to move the Democrats to the left. We need to start voting Republican until the Democrats get the message. Do you think I can get some funding for this? MM. It was easier to buy beer with a fake ID when driver's licenses were laminated. That's true. Laughing stock home. Dear UN, please don't laugh at Trump. The last time we did, he got us back pretty good. Contagious Chameleon. Isn't praising GDP growth from yesteryear also nostalgic? Everybody praises capitalism growth and wealth generation, but you can't keep capitalism and make everybody wealthy. Capitalism relies on inequality and oppressive relationships to generate wealth for few people. Without those relationships, it isn't capitalism. The growth capitalism operates like a cancer, or on paper. When we reference healthy growth in nature, it's regenerative and sustainable. Fran from Philadelphia. This John for Jeffrey. I wouldn't vote for Hitler from Philadelphia. Cheesesteaks are made with thinly sliced ribeye, not your own brain folds or whatever whiz kid is floating in the wood or year behind your ear holes. Know what I'm saying? California Uber Alles. Will Matt's audiobook include sound drops? Yemen genocide. Sam and Michael, what's your opinion of Andrew Gillum of Florida? Is he as progressive as he says? Never.
Right, but I'm quite eager to see him get elected governor
help him
of Florida.
win.
Right. I mean, I think the context and certainly the way he's put together his campaign is there for him to govern in a good way. So let's get him there.
Infowarsmusic.com. Hey, you guys are currently having a sale on all our content. So if you're a podcast or YouTube or in need of some new theme songs, you should totally stop by. Local milk person, not to force the issue, but was there a new character born yesterday? If so, it was a beautiful thing to witness. I'm all for Hitler 2020, even though he was such an idiot.
Centrist Hitler. Make it happen.
Jake the Snake. Hey, Sam and friends, 2 questions. First question, my econ professor keeps going on about how our debt is a massive problem because of China. Do you have any idea what she's talking about? Yes, she's under the impression that China could somehow do well by sinking our economy. So she's wrong. Sounds strange to me, but I don't know enough. Second question, I thought I heard Matt say that Literary Hangover was free for students. How do I listen to it?
Send me a tweet.
JJ Cool. Does North Dakota have different rules for attempted rape? Yesterday I heard North Dakota offering no comment on this and use a coloring book as a defense. Now, Kramer, what the hell is going on in North Dakota? Putting on the Fritz. Hey, I'm our crew. If you want to do some light reading that's still politically related, I recommend checking out Football for a Buck by Jeff Pearlman. It's about the USFL, the last league to compete with the NFL, and Trump's hilarious involvement destroying it. He bought a team and tried to use it as a bridge to the NFL. The NFL rejected him, and he said he'd never own a team, and he sued them for being a monopoly. Yeah, I remember that story. Welsh member, your discussion yesterday about getting the vote out, an underreported aspect of Cambridge Analytica implosion was that they mainly did not try to flip voters. Either here or in the States, they crafted their propaganda to discourage people from voting. Bernie Bros got dumb left messages. People of color got reminders of Hillary's super predator speech. Indeed. Jay Hutchie. Does Sam regret not knowing who Howie Hawkins is? I know who Howie Hawkins is. He was, if we're talking about the same guy, he was a Green candidate for president, like a perennial one. He ran for governor and he ran for a lot of different things. But I do not regret knowing or not knowing him. Colin from Nebraska. Can we call the listeners to get a shofar for Jordan Peterson finally being featured in a PragerU? No, I'm not going to waste that on that. Sean, MD, after years of poor management, long periods of crunch, and unpaid overtime, game developer Telltale lets go 250 employees without severance. They aren't the first and they won't be the last. tech industries needs to unionize. You, on a classic episode of The Simpsons, Principal Skinner diffuses sex scandal by confessing he's a virgin. Republicans live in a cartoon world. Jimmy Dore, superfan. Hi, all. Superfan here. I want to remind everyone Sam is a neoliberal sellout. It's like George Orwell probably said, it's better to vote somebody in who puts kids in cages rather than somebody who laughs when endorsing Medicare for all. Nitsky, I keep hearing that Dem leadership fears that if they win on Kavanaugh, they'll motivate the GOP base to vote. But if they lose, it'd motivate the Democratic base. Isn't that pure Demi Jor logic? I don't think the GOP. I don't think it's irrational to assume that. Let's put it that way. But I think it's wrong. Ethan, Republican women do care about misogyny and sexual predation, but care more about aligning with the prevailing conservative power structure.
That's what I said.
Bolson are leaking intestine. It looks like a race in Brazil has 2 shit bags. Bolsonaro in the bag he will always need after having me removed. Bull Prague, how could pizza gators like Flynn Jr. and Thurnovich have let this Kavanaugh gang rape story fly right under their noses? And the final I am of the day. Kentucky Fried Comrade, hey, I'm our crew. Reminder for the audience that Kavanaugh drafted a series of borderline rape fantasy questions towards Monica Lewinsky because at the end of the day, he's a Republican hatchet man. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted in and out of gear, waiting for my moment to happen.